1, 2, 3 videos so far, and this is the fourth video. The first video was on feedback on Moodle. The second video was mostly on definitions of child sexual abuse and how to understand child sexual abuse. And the third video was more about applications of previous course learnings to issues related to child sexual abuse. Now this fourth part is going to be on talking to children who have been sexually abused. And what you'll notice again is hopefully what you also noticed in previous videos. And that is that course learnings, what we've learned so far, apply very well to issues related to child sexual abuse. And they're also going to relate to other forms of abuse and neglect that we're going to cover for the rest of the course. So I think hopefully you're connecting the dots and seeing that the first part of the course were very important ideas about human development. And the second part of the course is the application of these ideas to various issues that interfere with optimal human development. And we also consider ideas related to how can we foster optimal development when individuals, when persons and families and communities have experienced adversities or traumas or risk factors, whatever you want to call them. They're all stumbling blocks to optimal development. And our job as human service professionals is to create conditions where people can develop optimally. And that's the overall purpose of the course. So now in part 4, we're going to be considering issues related to talking to children who have been sexually abused. The ideas related to talking to children who have been sexually abused apply to any traumatized population, any traumatized person. It also applies to self-compassion. So that means if you're having troubles, if you're feeling terrible, if you're feeling the results of trauma or some loss or anything that's keeping you from being emotionally available to yourself and to others, these ideas also apply to you, so you can be compassionate to yourself. So, big surprise. Emotional availability is the key phrase for adults when children tell them about being sexually abused. Now, tell me how many times you've heard the term emotional availability. Emotional availability is characteristic of parents who provide secure attachment situations to their children. Emotional availability is the key issue for any of us who have relationships with other people. Emotional availability is the key issue for us in relationship to ourselves, in relationship to nature, in relationship to any kind of spiritual experiences we might have. We have to be emotionally available. Adults are helpful to children when they respond with empathy and compassion. The focus is the children. It's not how we are feeling. We might feel like screaming and running out of the room and saying, how can people do these things to children? We have a perfect right to feel angry, upset, and indignant, and whatever else you might want to feel. But when you're with that child, you put your own emotions, you put them way in the background. The focus is on children. You can fall apart later. Children are more likely to talk when adults allow them to express themselves in their own words and in their own ways. It's important for adults not to show a great deal of emotion. I mean, look at my face. I mean, I actually don't like to look at myself when I'm videoing because I see myself as much more alive than my face often actually shows. And I just wonder what other people are seeing when I'm sitting there listening to them. But anyway, we still have to, I think I have a relatively neutral face. That's what I'm trying to get to. And I just hope it's a helpful neutral face. But that's what we need to have. We need to have a face that shows we're attentive. We're not passing judgment on anybody, including the people who harm the children. It's really important also to know that we have to be neutral toward the people who harm the children, because we don't know what these people actually mean to the children. There can be people who do some pretty awful things to kids, but the kids still want a relationship with that person. And we have to respect that. We can't start, mouthing off about what a terrible person that is. First of all, we don't even know the other person, so you don't know their circumstances. What they did was harmful, but it doesn't mean that we need to erase them from the kids' lives. There may be ways that there can be some taking responsibility, some realizing what they did, some apologies that are heartfelt apologies. I mean, there's so many possibilities here, and so we can't do anything but focus on the child. We can't bring any of our own issues into it. So we don't want to show shock, disbelief, anger, horror. We also don't want to gush over with sympathy and exaggerated compassion. People need a witness. Children need us to witness, and to be a quiet, respectful witness. That's our job. No matter how emotionally upset we may be, we have to be balanced. If we communicate verbally and non-verbally that sexual abuse is the most horrible thing, and abused children are damaged and hurt forever, this is harmful. Kids already have those fears, so the last thing we want to do is to reinforce those fears. In addition, adults harm children if adults blame themselves in the children's present for not protecting the children. Many children therefore become concerned with taking care of the parents and push themselves aside. So you can feel as guilty as you want as a parent, but don't let the kids know that, because they'll immediately want to take care of you. And you take care of yourself. It's not the children's job to take care of you. You find other adults to help you, not the children. The children may silence themselves to protect parents. And I've seen this. I've seen boys who are relatively well put together, from relatively well put together families, who don't tell their parents about being sexually abused because they don't want their parents to get upset. Now, can you imagine, a little boy protecting his parents? They're also afraid the parents, they might disappoint the parents. So we have to think about all of these things. We have to present ourselves as accepting of whatever, and we'll love our children no matter what happens. And a lot of kids don't know that, and so they protect the parents by not telling them about some pretty serious things that may happen to them. So we have to learn how to be child-focused and let other adults take care of us. Adults can say they're sorry they were not able to protect the children, however. You can say that. Gee, I'm so sorry that happened to you. I wish I had been there. I wish I had known. I wish I could have done something. But again, you might not want to say that all at once, because you have to pay attention to what the kids are expressing, and not only verbally, but non-verbally. So we have to be, sensitive and responsive to the children, and forget about our own preoccupations. Furthermore, in the concern for the children or their own guilt, adults sometimes quiz the children or give them the third degree, which is a series of poorly timed questions that demand immediate responses. Don't do that. Give the children time to settle into the fact that maybe they can trust you, maybe you won't fall apart, maybe you won't get angry at them, and maybe they can actually tell you and you'll listen sympathetically. It's important not to insist that children talk, but rather just give them a safe haven. Now, you've heard the term safe haven a few times, right? They need a safe haven if they're going to talk about their experiences and to explore the meanings and implications of their experiences. They need to feel safe. Nobody's going to talk to you and have it help them if they don't feel safe. They might talk, but if they don't feel safe, it's not going to help them. So safety is always first. So there are two types of conversations that we have with children, two general types at least, that we have with children regarding sexual abuse. And one is a forensic interview, which is just typically a very structured interview that's used for evidence when the perpetrators of child sexual abuse are prosecuted. Now, very, very few cases of child sexual abuse are actually prosecuted. I'm still not sure what the number is, but I would guess it's about 10% of all the founded cases of child sexual abuse are actually prosecuted. Often the parents don't want to go forward because they don't want to subject their children to the cross-examinations that are required according to most court rulings. So you can have a 5-year-old who's going to be accused of being promiscuous, and that's okay. I mean, to me, it's the most horrific thing that I can think of, that you can cross-examine and grill a very young child, but you can. And some jurisdictions will allow kids not to be in the same room with the person who is alleged to have perpetrated on them, but sometimes they have to testify in front of the perpetrator. And parents will not want their children to go through that. Now, sometimes perpetrators are actually sensitive enough to plead guilty so that the children don't have to testify. But there is a number of perpetrators who will willingly subject the children to more trauma in order to save their own skins, rather than just saying, I did it, I'm sorry, I was wrong, I did something harmful, I'm now going to do everything I can to make up for what I did. I want to do everything I can to make sure I don't do it again. I throw myself on the mercy of the court. I'll gladly do treatment. I'll gladly pay for the treatment of the children and their families. I'll do whatever it takes to make sure I don't do it again, and I'll do whatever it takes to make up for what I did. Now that is a statement of remorse. And that's what you're hoping for. And then, of course, they've got to follow through. So the formal interview is the forensic interview that's used in court. Now, the more informal interview is what I just talked about. You just sit there and you listen. And so first I'm going to talk about the informal interview, and then I'll talk about the more formal interview. So in the informal interview, you may unexpectedly be confronted with children who say someone has sexually abused them. And it's really important that you respond with knowledge, with sensitivity, with being very responsive to the children. In other words, provide a safe haven. So these things will sound kind of simple, but often it's the simple things that make all the difference. So one thing is, sit on the same level with the child. Speak in a calm voice. Regulate eye contact. Don't stare or avoid the eyes. Although sometimes some children are not comfortable looking into the eyes of others. In some cultures, that's actually a sign of respect. So if a child is not looking at you, don't panic, just say, the child's not looking at me. That's it. Sit at a comfortable distance from the child. Don't sit across the room, but don't sit, knee to knee either. Just sit where it's comfortable. It's important actually to echo the last word of the child's statement. When the children are talking about sexual abuse, they're in a heightened emotional state. They're usually pretty tense. So to hear just a few of their words repeated can actually help them feel heard. And they need to feel heard if they're going to continue. They need to feel understood. So echoing the last words of the child's statement can be very helpful. Reflect back what you just heard to check that you've heard correctly. And I do this routinely in my research. I say, this is what I heard you say. Did I get it? Did I hear you? And people are actually relieved. You have to do it when the timing's right. If somebody's gushing out with words, you're not going to interrupt them to ask them, did you get it? You got to wait till there's a natural pause and you've got their attention. So that's part of emotional availability. It's also called clinical timing. You got to have really good clinical timing to create a safe haven for children. So use the 80-20 approach, and it may actually be a 90-10 approach, which means children do most of the talking. We do maybe 10, 5%, 20% of the talking, and children do the rest. Nod your head, use gentle body language, use the word the children's use, but only the slang, not only the slang, but other words too. And this is an example of using the same word. And this happened to me. This kid said this to me, and I tell you, I was surprised. She said, "He put his thing in my crap hole." And I said, "He put his thing in your crap hole." You should have seen the relief on that little girl's face. She's about 9 years old. And here's another example. A 9-year-old girl whose grandfather sexually abused her for 6 years from the time she was 3, cringed every time she used the word wiener, which was the term she knew for penis. I used that word in a matter-of-fact way. Finally, the little girl started to relax as she used the word wiener. Don't put words into the child's mouth. Make sure that the child says what the child wants to say, and don't try to get the child to say something the child hasn't said. Be warm and accepting and use simple, concrete language. Adults can improve their skills in talking to children about sexual abuse by using their imaginations, and not in a wild way, but in a tethered way, in a way that's connected to the children's reality. They can imagine how they would feel if they had been used and abused. If they can imagine what it's like to trust someone and have that trust betrayed. Because often child sexual abuse is a profound betrayal. Imagine how it feels to feel ashamed and stigmatized, and feel that shame of being no good, by being worthless, by doing something really bad, and you can never make up for it. And these are typical events, typical experiences and a sense of themselves that children have. So imagine how hard that is for children. But you can't be overwhelmed by it. You can know that these are possibilities that the children are feeling, and so you want your heart to be open. You want your empathy to be right there. So child sexual abuse can be a traumatic life event that requires sensitive responsiveness, just like any other trauma. The following are some examples of what to say when children are talking to adults about being sexually abused. As adults, we can adapt these examples to fit our own situations when we're talking with children. Children test adults, and by telling them just a little bit, if adults pass the early test, then children are likely to say more. Kids are hyper aware of whether or not parents or other adults are attuned to them. And if you are not, they are not going to tell you what's on their hearts and minds. Sexual abuse is hard to talk about. Just think about that. Sexual abuse is hard to talk about. And so you can say something like that. You know, I understand that this is really hard for you to talk about it, but I'm glad you're thinking that you might be able to trust me. Children already know how hard it is to talk about sexual abuse. When adults acknowledge this, children often feel encouraged to go on. Not every child will, but a lot of kids will. Saying things like, uh-huh, and I see. In conversations with you, children may be testing the reality of their experiences. They can feel like, did this really happen? I mean, is this really me? Did this really happen to me? Because it can be so ego-dystonic. It can be so far away from any of their inner working models, any of their expectations. As a general principle, anything a particular child feels is valid for that child. We can't challenge the child's sense of reality. We can't challenge what the child feels. A simple aha or I see could suffice to validate the child's experience and encourage them to go on. One of the things that I find very useful is to say something like, you seem to be uncomfortable. Would you like to stop now? When children start to talk about the abuse, there's a point where it may be wise to stop. Children sometimes become overwhelmed with emotions. They might need a breather, might want to be held, or go to a playground, or spend some time alone, maybe at the computer, playing computer games, going for a walk, playing basketball in the backyard. Any number of things. They just need to calm down. They just need to re-regulate. The pacing depends upon the children. In other words, if you want to suggest a break, it depends. It depends on the children and what the children are showing. When adults encourage children to take breaks, trust can actually grow. And that's really, trust is the point. You want the children to trust you, and you want to be worthy of the trust. It's important. It's okay to love the person who abused you. Now, you might not ever say this, but you could. Many children have long-term relationships with the persons who sexually abuse them. They feel attached to these persons. They have happy memories of the good times together, and they may have enjoyed being close to that person. This is an important part of children's experience, and children benefit when adults acknowledge that their relationship with the perpetrator may well go beyond the sexual abuse. You can acknowledge that, yes, what is happening is confusing. Gosh, there's so many things that you can be thinking about and feeling. I mean, that's what happens when people touch children sexually in ways that are not what children want or need at that point. So I understand you didn't like the sexual parts of what happened. You liked the person, but not what she or he did to you. With some possible exceptions, children did not like the sexual abuse, even if they experienced pleasure. Children need to make these statements with little or no prompting from adults. So when I say with possible exceptions, I don't know any personal exception. I don't know any exceptions where the children liked the sexual abuse. They might have liked the attention. They might have had at least a little tiny bit of sexual pleasure, but that was confusing. But I say with some possible exceptions because I and you have to be prepared for anything the children say. So the next child I talk to may say, gee, I really like the sexual abuse and I wish I was still having sex. So that could happen. It's never happened in my case, but it could happen, and you must be open to that. Another thing to say is you may have heard that sexual abuse is not your fault, but a lot of kids think it is. So what do you think? Now, again, you have to time all these questions. You just can't blurt them all out all at once. You have to see where the kids are and whether or not it makes sense to even ask these questions. Most children do believe that sexual abuse is their fault. One little girl said of the 6 years that her grandfather sexually abused her, and this is the girl I just talked about a little while ago, I never told him not to do it. And because she never told him not to do it, she thought it was her fault. If adults attempt to assure children that the abuse is not their fault, when the children believe it is, then adults are ignoring children's perspectives, and they risk invalidating the children's perspectives. They may shut the children down, too. So helping children see where the fault lies requires careful, sensitive responses to the children, and it can take time. It might not happen in one sitting. It could take years. I've had parents tell me that, every few years I have similar conversations with my children, but I say they're similar because the topics are similar, but I can tell they mean different things to the children because the children's level of cognitive development has changed, and so they need to understand it in a new way. So that's what I mean, is some of these informal conversations can take place over many years, and kids may indeed come back to the same issue, but they may be coming back to it from another angle. So never ever say, gee, we've already talked about this 10 times. I mean, gosh, that's insensitive. The perpetrator took advantage of you. I can't tell you what an antidote that can be. A child feels that, okay, it's not their fault, and you can help them explore why they think it's their fault, but at a certain point, they may be ready to hear that this person took advantage of you. This is a message most sexually abused children can benefit from hearing, but again, it's a question of how well timed it is. There's no set of rules or procedures that pinpoint the absolute right time. Adults must depend on their judgments, their sensitivity about children's readiness to hear such an important message. That person took advantage of you. That can be a great relief when a kid is 8. The kid can hear it again, 12, 13, 14. The kid can hear it over and over and over again. And one day they will actually internalize it and know that that is exactly what happened. that children are never responsible for child sexual abuse, and the person who perpetrated it did take advantage. And one of the advantages they have is that the culture teaches children it's their fault. And as long as children are blaming themselves, they can't see the hugeness of the roles of perpetrators. This idea that sexual abuse is the child's fault protects perpetrators. It's very handy for perpetrators to have kids believe that. Now, is there anything else? I can't tell you how many times I've asked that question, and there's a lot more that we haven't covered. And so you can be surprised. You think, oh wow, we really talked about a lot, and then you find out there's even more. And so you sit there, and it doesn't matter if you're tired, it doesn't matter if you want to throw up, it doesn't matter. You sit there and you listen, and you're attentive, and you're sensitive. So just be really, really sensitive to children. You know, the fact that some children experience sexual pleasure, or they may have liked some of the attention, can be very shameful to the kids. And so we sometimes might ask them about that, but ask it in such a gentle, sweet way that children know that if they say, yeah, that is what happened, they'll also feel some relief, because typically they feel very guilty. And they feel very defective, and of course that's the very definition of shame. Talking to children about their own sexual abuse is a set of skills that adults can learn only if they understand child sexual abuse and have capacities for empathy, sensitivity, and regulation of their own emotions. So this is the end of part 4, and part 5 and the final part will be on forensic interviews.